Good morning, members of the Senate Finance Committee. We are now in session. We have two items of business. One, a concurrence that we need to get done. And I'll have the analyst, David, bring that to our attention now. And then we're going to deal with House Bill 1210.
Okay, the concurrence is Senate Bill 9. If you recall, this is collective bargaining. It alters the collective bargaining process between the within the university system of Maryland and their exclusive representatives under current law. Each system institution negotiates with an exclusive representative for 3 bargaining units at each institution. The bill consolidates the bargaining units, or it consolidates the process, and it requires a combined memorandum of understanding if an exclusive representative represents numerous bargaining units across a system institution. So instead of negotiating with each president under the bill, they would negotiate with the chancellor of the University of Maryland system, not the chancellor directly, but whoever the chancellor designates. The bill passed the Senate with no amendments. The House was working on the bill, and they have a series of amendments, and rather than trying to explain the amendments, I put the reprint out in front of you. Oh, okay, and I'll go through the reprint very quickly. There is no changes to any of the definitions. The House did strike a provision relating to the designation of who's supervisory, management, or confidential employees under current law. It's either the Secretary of Budget and Management, or if you're in the higher education part of the bill, it would be the university system. This would change it to be consistent with the National Labor Relations Board. The House struck all that language, so you're back to the way it was. And then the major changes regarding the negotiation process between the system and the exclusive representatives start on page 7 of the reprint. So what the House did essentially was establish a 2-tier system for negotiations. Certain items would be negotiated with the chancellor, and those would be on the bottom of the page, items B. These would be system-wide considerations, and you can see what they are. So in my understanding, is based on negotiations between the university system and AFSCME and various delegates. This is what they came up with. So instead of having all negotiations with the chancellor, it would break it down into two subsets. The first set would be B, and these would be system-wide institution considerations, and these would be negotiated directly with the chancellor or the chancellor's representative, and you can see what they are. Contracting out or supplementing bargaining unit work, duration of consolidated memorandum, it goes down. There's 20 of these items, or actually 22 items onto the next unnumbered page. So all of these items would be negotiated with the chancellor. And then number 2, these items would be negotiated between the exclusive representatives and the president of the particular system institution. It was felt that these items were more germane to each system institution. So you could see what is listed here. There's 7 of these items: designation of essential employees, student break, hours of work, other compensation does not direct. All these items would be negotiated with the presidents of the system institution. There's additional language relating to a consolidated memorandum of understanding. It may not include items that are listed in paragraph 1, and that pertains to the ones that are system-wide. So it's a may, they could if they wanted to, but these are really 2 distinct subsets right now. And then the remainder of the bill deals with changing the process for memorandum of understanding and negotiations in relation to the fact that there'll be 2 tiers of negotiations on certain on the listed items, either with the chancellor of the university or with the system institution, based on those listed items in that new language.
Okay, I see Senator Kramer and then Senator Feldman. Well, you had yours on. Okay, well, Senator Kramer.
despite these weakening amendments that will make the anti-labor people very happy, Madam Chair, I will move to concur, and we will satisfy those who just could not grasp the nature of the value and importance of the bill in its original form. But in this case, Madam Chair, a half loaf is better than no loaf. So move to concur.
Second. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right. All in favor of the motion to concur, please raise your hand.
Which will make Senator Hershey very pleased.
I'm disappointed. I want to fight this out. All the way to
Okay. All right, so we got everybody. All right. Thank you very much. Now we've got to move to the other issue, and we've got a lot of work to do in a short amount of time. David, take us to...
Okay, so this is where everything is at right now. You have a couple of documents in front of you. You have the reprint of the bill that's under consideration on the floor with the 2 adopted committee amendments. If you recall, the adopted committee amendments, which were adopted on the floor, those are listed on page 3 of the reprint. So the House added that this new requirement would not apply to sole proprietors. The Finance Committee and the Senate adopted also that this section does not apply to limited liability company owned by a single member or a privately held company if at least 75% of the company's shareholders are family members. And where you're at right now is Senator Castley offered an amendment that would...
Excuse me, David, could I butt in? The Vice Chair has an update you'd like to share. Maybe if this might
Actually, maybe I see Senator Hayes walking in. No, what I was going to say was, well, let Dave finish what he was going to say, and then I'll
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So the issue came up on the floor about, what are the penalties here? There are no penalties specified in this new language in the bill. There is the link to the report requirement under SSTAT. So any entity that has any type of personal property in the state of Maryland has to report information to state departments in assessment and taxation. If they do not make this report with all the items included, then they would not be considered a business in good standing with the state, and therefore ultimately probably could not do business in the state because of that. So what the bill does is it adds, if you're subject to this part of the law, and that's where some of the confusion was, if you're subject to this part of the law, you would have to report the information that Commerce would require you to report under their scorecard as part of your annual report to the State Departments of Assessments and Taxation. Again, there's no specific monetary penalty. The California law had very significant penalties associated with it, but the bill was a little more narrowly drawn too. It only dealt with entities with corporate boards, not just management structures in general. So the California law had very significant penalties, but this bill has no real penalties. The only real penalty is if you follow the logic of the bill, if you're part of the scorecard, you have to report that information. If you don't report that information, your report is incomplete, and therefore you may not be considered a business in good standing with the State Departments of Assessments and Taxation, and all that stems from that.
If I could just butt in right there, I think that may be a major problem right there, that everybody has got to report on this issue, no matter your size, your income, what your mission is. For many small and family businesses, your mission was probably to feed your family and to have a future. And to have everybody in this as if there's a competition going on at a time when for many businesses, they don't have a board. they don't have formal meetings with anybody about anything. And they are simply doing what they have to do to make payroll, to pay their taxes, and to feed the family. And I'm wondering what we can do to clarify who ought to have to do this report. There are certainly many entities that are large enough to do it, that have or should have social missions, and a lot of nonprofits might even be in that category. But let's just go back to what you were just saying.
There's a couple other items. As Senator Hayes relayed on the floor, who does this apply to? Again, there was a lot of discussion on the floor of whether this bill only applies to those who are seeking a state benefit, or does it apply to everybody who's required to file with the department. There's a report from the legislation that Senator Bidel sponsored 2 years ago that says that, and for some reason the comptroller was required to submit this report, even though the information goes to SSTAT. But that report suggested that 62,909 businesses submitted reports to SSTAT under this particular part of the law. SSTAT itself says there are 400,000 businesses that are in good standing with them. So it's hard to say how many are actually out there, but the bill does eliminate a lot of businesses. It eliminates sole proprietorships, it eliminates single-person LLCs, and those with 75% or more family members on their corporate structure. So I don't know if we'll ever get at this point get an exact number. And there's another document in front of you, in addition to Senator Cassidy's amendment, which it specifies that the Department of Commerce and the office shall develop, maintain, and post a publicly state scorecard that can place diversity on each entity seeking a state benefit. So that's his amendment. Senator Hayes has an additional amendment, which is sitting in front of you. And if you go to that same page of the reprint where it requires the scorecard, Senator Hayes is proposing that be just a report, not a scorecard. And that's all I have right now on this. There's supposed to be an Attorney General's letter coming to make clear who this, from their perspective, who this bill applies to. As I walk into this room, I haven't seen the letter yet. I don't know if it's available. So that's all I have at this point.
Okay, I'm going to Hershey and then to the floor leader, and to Feldman.
I'll defer, I'll wait till this floor leader speaks and then.
She said you first.
Well, wait a minute. You if you don't want to go first, then I'll go to Feldman and then to Hershey and to you. Okay.
Floor leader
Madam
may
Chair.
have more up-to-date info. So just a couple quick things. Number one, we're still waiting on a formal AG opinion. We have maybe an informal opinion on the language and what it says, but I'm reluctant to bring that into the mix because it's not a formal letter for everybody to see. But that's not unimportant in terms of whatever the intent is of the committee, you kind of need to know sort of what the language currently sort of means in order to amend it either broadly or consistent with the floor leader is saying or with the Cassidy-Hershey amendment. So that, I think, is one issue. Having said that, I do have reason to believe that the Speaker's office and the Senate President's office have conceptually come up with some new language that I think Senator Kramer may have, but it's not formally in front of it. We don't have the formal amendment language. And so what I might suggest, and the floor leader may have some more info, maybe Senator Kramer could at least describe conceptually the language that has been arrived at between the Speaker's office and the Senate President's office. And again, understanding we don't have the AG opinion, but we also don't have the formal amendment. But I think it might be helpful to get the pulse of the committee there. And I'll defer to the floor leader and Senator Hershey on some further thoughts. But that's just trying to get us up to speed on where we are right now on this issue.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I think, and thank you, and you raised some good points. I had a chance to talk to Senator West yesterday, given his scenario that he explained, at least as it relates to like those very small businesses, as you just so eloquently described. I think Senator JB, I forget JB's last name right now. Help me out. What's that? Yeah, Senator Jennings. I'm sorry. Brought this issue up in a voting session about maybe the threshold may be too low, which captures a lot more businesses. So I wonder if we maybe raise that to not be as inclusive as far as, sales or whatever, if that may alleviate some of the concerns. As committee staff has already said, I think part of the consternation on the floor yesterday was around the scorecard and the unclarity around what a scorecard actually means. Some people interpret it as like some type of grading system where there's a pass or fail or whatever, and that gave people somewhat of a discomfort. And so the amendment that I have before you here that David put forward is changing the word scorecard to a report. But I'd be very curious to hear from this committee if there would be some comfort, especially given the legislation that passed about 3 years ago and the consistency around the threshold as far as those businesses that would be represented, in addition to the amendments that we've already adopted, exempting those individuals where there's 75% or more ownership or those C Corp organizations.
Okay, Senator Hershey and Senator Kramer and Senator Bottle.
Madam Chair, I was probably just going to argue the same point I did last night, so, but I agree with you. I think that one, we really, again, the question last night was what did the legislation say? I'm still convinced that the part in the property tax article refers back, as you were mentioning, to this section, this new section 19-106, meaning if you are looking for any of this, then you have to provide that. I think that's where everybody thought that we were. And if you don't seek state benefits, then that's fine too, but all of this information then isn't required. So I think we all want to find a solution that we can all kind of agree on. So if, I'll just let whoever else needs to speak.
Okay, we're going to Senator Kramer and then to Senator Bottle and then back to the floor leader. Or Senator. Okay. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In light of some of the concerns that have been raised, and as Senator Hayes referenced, consistency with House Bill 1116 of a couple of years ago, I think it would alleviate a lot of concern and provide consistency if, in addition to, as we have before us now, amendment that would change the scorecard to a report to alleviate concerns about that piece of it, that we also adopt an amendment that would clarify, and this would be in place of Senator Cassily's amendment, an amendment that would provide that the entities that need to fill out this report would be either those that are receiving a state benefit of over $1 million, which is currently in the bill, or entities with an operating budget or sales exceeding $5 million, which is exactly what we did in House Bill 1116, and this would comport with that bill that Senator Bidle, I believe, was the lead sponsor on, and that should, I think, alleviate all the angst that we heard on the floor last night about Two Guys Pizza having to be doing something, and now we put it in a posture that's consistent with what we've done before. So I hope the committee will give that consideration, Madam
Let me
Chair.
ask you one question. If we go this direction that you're pointing us, which sounds good in general, let's say, and I've looked at Champ McCullough's testimony for the for-profit folks, and he's talking about the fact that if somebody has a cement company, and it's really a family cement company, but they do state contracts, they'll cement roads and bridges and stuff like that, and it's really just a family business, but they're going to do contracts over $1 million. They might in a year do contracts over $5 million. Should that family company that is simply doing contracts on roads and bridges have to have a social mission which is reflected in what this scorecard is trying to measure? And in fact, could you get your bridges and roads done if you had to have enough of them to be vying against each other to do that? If their whole reason for existing, like most small businesses, is to feed their families and have a pension and to eat. So that's my question.
Chair, I will point out that number one, the notion of a scorecard will be gone with this amendment. So now it will be a report. It'll be data information collected so that we have a greater understanding of what diversity looks like in the business world in Maryland. But it also, in the bill now, we have indicated that a privately held company that is comprised of at least 75% family members, that it's not applicable under this bill. So I think, and maybe council can clarify that, but am I mistaken in that regard?
That was the amendment that you adopted, and it's a very similar amendment that exempts folks from the SSTAT requirement. The question would be, is this, if the committee chooses to adopt the $5 million limitation, would you want that to be this section does not apply to a company that does less than $5 million, or do you want it to be part of the definition of of entity and say that entity includes blah, 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 and somebody who does more than $5 million in business in the state?
Well, let me ask you this, Madam Chair, we're going to be back here later today. Is that correct or no? Was I mistaken in that?
We don't really have bills to consider today.
The question is,
No,
can we take the time to work out this definition and come back later today with the amendment so that everybody can see it? I think it addresses, as I said, the concerns of the folks we heard on the floor last night, and then we can make sure we've got it properly drafted. I don't want to do this on the fly.
Yeah, we definitely can come back here today.
But I
We
think
don't have
it'll
a
be,
session tonight.
we'll have greater clarity and be in a better position.
Now, we
Madam
want to
Chair.
be sure before we leave here that we've got all of the questions that we need to have you consider. All right, Senator Bottle and Senator.
Thank you, and
Rusher.
thank you to my colleague from Montgomery County. Yes, it was House Bill 1116, but it was also Senate Bill 11, which was my bill in the Senate. And it was Delegate Hellman's bill at the time in the House, and it was a heck of a floor fight. It really was. And all that bill says is that they needed to record the total number of members of the person's board of directors and the number of female board members. So this is asking for a lot more information than just reporting. So I want to be careful that we don't have another floor fight on this bill, which probably took an hour last night. And we need to get it passed, or the Speaker of the House is not going to be happy with us, because it is her bill. So let's be very careful that we, craft it in a way that we can get this passed on the floor. And, I appreciate the idea of the $5 million. My question is, suppose a company only has $2 million, but $1 million of it's coming from the state, or they should be required to do the report, right? Because they're still getting $1 million in state contracts. So I want to be very, very careful that we address the intention of the bill, and that's for companies that are receiving state contracts that they're showing this diversity. And it's not just corporations, it's nonprofits too. We have a lot of nonprofits that get a huge amount of money from the state, and we don't know if their boards are diverse unless we craft this properly. So I do think we should work on it and get it right. And this bill was going to go down last night. I can tell you from the text messages I was getting. This bill was going to go down if we had had to vote last night. So let's be careful that we get this amendment right and we're prepared for the floor. Thank you.
Could I ask you a question? Is your concern only about the businesses that have a board and get state benefits? Or, because it isn't clear to me, as I keep looking at the bill in its current posture, whether also included in this bill are entities that are businesses in Maryland that do whatever the minimum is that we're saying in business, but that don't have a social mission because their job is to pour concrete or to do something like that. And I keep thinking we are trying to squeeze apples into the oranges spot. There are a lot of businesses, most nonprofits are looking for state contracts, so they serve state populations that the state is maybe paying the bill, the underlying bill for, and I think they wouldn't have a problem at all doing what this is requiring. But I'm just asking, just imagine Joe Smith who pours concrete. And so since it's governments largely that will get concrete poured, you can say he's working for them. But the man is spending all his time pouring concrete and paying his taxes or doing those things, and to expect him to do an annual report about a kind of social mission idea, to me seems far-fetched. Now, I think it might be very important that they have employees, that they aren't discriminating if there are people able to work in their company and have the skills to do so and can do the job. But to me, it seems like a struggle to say that with all kinds of work in all kinds of companies, you want them to show they've got the social mission, because many people are simply trying to get by and to feed families. All right.
Madam Chair,
I'm going to shut up. All right, but Klossmeyer had a hand up. Senator Augustine has his up, and we'll come right around. All right, Klossmeyer.
No, well, I just want to dovetail that with what you just said, and I think what Senator Bidle had said, that are VFWs and American Legions and those sort of organizations getting thrown in with all of this? I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
But let me ask the analyst, the way you read the bill right now, are they in it or not?
I don't know. I'm not very familiar with, as Senator Jennings says, the language that brings in the nonprofits is a corporation, foundation, school, hospital, or other legal entity for which none of the net earnings inure to the benefit of any private shareholder or an individual holding an interest in the entity. I don't know if an American Legion or I don't know if they're considered corporations, foundations, nonprofit corporations, foundations, schools, hospitals, or other legal entities. I don't know what. I would have to find out how they structure themselves. I mean, are they tax exempt? Do they? I don't know. I don't know enough about how they.
If we're coming back, unfortunately, after session, maybe if you have a chance
If
to
you
find
do the
that out.
$5 million language similar to what applies to, then I would think they would probably drop out, but because they don't really.
Okay. Mr. Floor Leader, can I come down this side and come back to you? Let's come right down. All right. Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like there's a few things I would like to respond to. One, I think that what Senator Kramer laid out makes a lot of sense. I hope that we can work towards that clarifying language, and that we get that and we get it right. I would also just say that as someone who has been in business, my whole life, we report and we do the things that the government asks us to do all the time. If our mission, our goal is profit, there's no doubt about that. If the government says that we have to follow certain environmental regulations, we got to figure out how to do it. If they say that we need to report on those things, we have to figure out how to do it. Now, we still have our mission, which is to make a profit. But we, as policymakers here, established a policy that says what we think is important. There is an unbelievable gap right now with regard to what is being spent and how it's being utilized. The gap between the wealth of African Americans versus others is unconscionable, quite frankly. It really is. And I believe that what this bill does, is a couple things that I think that are very, very important. One really is, we know it. So sometimes, Madam Chair, we know things. I know it because I have to live it, right? But there's no transparency to it in order to really be able to see it. And that's what I thought was about a report. I think the report is fine. It can be aggregated information that helps us to be able to see in a larger sense what really is going on out there. Because we sense it, but we don't have that information. That, to me, applies particularly to the concrete company that you're talking about, Madam Chair. The choices and the decisions that the concrete company makes, who derives a significant amount of their income based on their business from state funds. They derive it from state funds. We need to know, I think that we should know, what is happening, what is going on there. Again, we can do it in a larger sense. That, to me, is what this bill was about. I definitely understand that there is a threshold under which there are some entities that don't necessarily have the wherewithal for those things, and that's part of, I think, what the amendment will attempt to do. But for those who have got to do it, trust me, they'll figure it out. They'll do it, and they'll continue to maintain their profit, and they'll do those kinds of things, but we'll have some transparency, we'll see what's going on, and we'll have a better sense to be able to do our future policy along the way. And so that's why I hope that we can think of it in that context. And I think that it's a similar context to what now we're trying to get it back more closely to the posture with the women, right? Where it was, like we exposing the fact, we'll see what's going on, so that then something can be done about it. That, to me, is the context of this.
Okay, we're coming right down the line here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question for, I guess, the floor leader, because we don't have the sponsor here. I just want to make sure that on page 3 of 5, number 3, where we talk about, I guess, line 3, old line 3, that the entity that we're asking all these questions of, these are the folks that qualify for a state benefit. So we're only asking all those questions for someone that's applying for a contract, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It applies to those people who are seeking some type of state benefit, whether it's a contract. I think it also identifies a tax credit and grant.
Okay. But it doesn't say for $1 million. It's for any state benefit? I mean, it's okay
No,
with me. I just want to.
if you look over on page 2 and go down to line 19, well, it's actually line 17 through line 22.
Okay.
It
Oh,
identifies
that's a
the
fine
different
statement.
categories by which what criteria they would have to meet.
And so in our amendment where we talk about a report, where does it tell us what the report is going to include for the companies that are over $5 million?
Right, and so if you go to page, I think it's 3, I done read this thing so many times, where is it? It says scorecard, so. Okay, yes, so if you go to page 3, down in lines 11 through 12, it say develop, maintain, and post publicly a state entity scorecard. The proposed amendment that staff has given to us actually changes the word scorecard to report. And as you know, consistent with SB 911, it identified a report as opposed to a scorecard, and I think that's where a lot of contention rests last.
So number D, letter D, is what applies to all the companies that we've defined, that they're not family-owned corporations, they're 5 million or more, then that's what D is going to tell us. They have to still develop and maintain a state equity report.
That's what we believe it to be. We're waiting to hear from the AG's office, and hopefully sometime today we'll get greater clarity on
I
that.
just want to make sure that we're ready for the floor, and if I can help you, I'm happy to, but I need to make sure I understand what.
No, yes, ma'am. You helped me yesterday, Senator Bidle, and standing up, and that's why I appreciate it, because I think there was a lot of confusion. I apologize if I added to that confusion, but we definitely want to make sure that we get it right in this committee. So, even if there's opposition, which I would imagine it would be, at least if it's opposition to what we actually intend to do here on the floor.
Well, I think we need to do this. I just want to make sure that we understand it and we're ready for the floor fight. So thank you, Senator.
Okay, Senator Hershey, Senator Jennings.
Thank you, Madam
And then
Chair.
I got-
Just to follow up, the changing of the term from scorecard to reporting, I think, is important. But reporting for the sake of gathering data is one thing. But a report to potentially use that information against a company or to discriminate against a company from going further is another thing. And I think it's important that we decide, is this report an internal report, or is this report something that's public? Because SDAT information is public information. I can go back and look at any business entity and see, a number of different things on them. So I think we should decide what we want that report to do. We keep hearing a lot of information that it is to collect data that we then make decisions on further. So I think we have to decide what happens with this report or this information. Second, this is the other part. I mean, this bill's kind of two parts. It's about data collection, and then there's a big policy issue that says that an entity may not qualify for state benefits unless they are able to demonstrate the following. I'm just not sure how that potentially conflicts with companies that have already gone through an extensive process to be a certified MBE company. That's something that we already have in place that said if you want, or you are a MBE, then you get certain type of, scoring advantages in a procurement process or something like that. Is this potentially going to eliminate a number of companies and maybe conflict with the MBE program that we have? So I just think we want to make sure that we're not, one, hurting those MBEs that are already out there, but at the same time not being, put in a position where other companies may or may not be able to compete for state contracts.
If I could just ask you, is your concern that with the MBE program, we have focused on who people employ, which is something that I do think it's easier to here you're dealing with who controls the company as a board. And a lot of folks that are fine as employees have no interest in trying to control a company and no skills to help to control a company and don't have maybe the investment to put in to be part of the board.
Right.
And that's why, I could see this right away if you were talking about what are the employment practices of the entity. Oh, okay, Senator Jennings.
So I guess my first is a comment, then just to back up with two things I've heard earlier. One is, we keep talking about the board. A lot of these smaller companies, they have boards, but let's be honest, these boards are not proactive. It's pretty much the CEO or whoever's running it, who's the president of the company, who's making the decisions. I mean, I work on the federal level with contracts, and if you're trying to get minority representation in contracts, you're dealing with 8A corporate or 8A, capable or entitled companies that have minority ownership that can get in there and compete on that stuff. But if you're trying to deal with this with boards, again, most of these small companies, they don't have active boards. I mean, yes, they put placeholders in there and they name Joe Smith and Mary Sue to put them on the board, but they don't have their quarterly meetings with minutes and all that. It's if anything, they gun deck it and write the reports up. So I'm just saying that. I mean, if you're really trying to get into it, it's about who the shareholders are. They're the ones that have the financial, obligation. And the other one is, Senator Augustine mentioned it about the report, and Senator Hershey followed it up, is SDAT, everything is searchable on the computer on companies. We can put in there, if you know the company's name, you can put into it, and it tells you, are they in good standing? And I want to make sure that this data is submitted on an aggregate level, not line item, where you can actually go in and search Joe's Pizza Shop and say, hey, what are they? And it gives you all this data. That would be, I'd like to make sure that that's in this bill, that we do not publicize individual line item information on each company.
Okay, Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two things. One, I wanted to go back to committee staff, and Senator Jennings just mentioned this. David, you had mentioned that if they did not comply with this information, that it may potentially put them not in good standing. I'm not sure if, in reading this, that the bill says that or that's the intention. I wonder if we could see, and I've been advised that that's not the case. I think when Senator Griffith stood up on the floor yesterday, that was a point that she tried to clarify. I wonder if there's an opportunity to get greater clarity, because it doesn't say that if the organization don't submit this information, that would thereby put them out of good stand. I wonder if, since we're going to come back later today, we could get greater clarity on that before we come back.
I'll look into that, but the idea here is if you follow the stream of the bill, that anybody who is subject to 19106, and they also have to submit a report to SDAT.
Right.
If they're subject to that, then they would have to submit the information to SDAT, like they would also have to submit the information on number of women on their board. They would have to submit that information. If they do not submit that information, then they would not be in good standing with SDAT because their report would be incomplete.
Right.
And I'll get clarifying on that, but it would be the same with those companies that must submit the information on a number of female board members. I would imagine that if you're $5 million or more, and you do not submit that information, you would not be in good standing with the departments because your report would be incomplete.
Right. Yeah, if we could just get clarity on that before we come back. And also, Madam Chair, if you would allow, Senator Hershey had mentioned to me yesterday before we convened an amendment that he was contemplating, and I was thinking about it, and it made a lot of sense, but we didn't get a chance to address it. I wonder if he still had interest in that amendment, and what would be the thought. I think it kind of makes sense. It may have been something that we may have overlooked, but Senator Hershey, I don't want to take away your thunder.
No thunder, and that's why I wanted to mention it to you first. Madam Chair, just had a number of requests about the how underrepresented community was defined. And I heard some things, and if you remember, one of our senators actually got up on the floor and spoke about this a little bit, of not necessarily selecting one of these terms specifically, but as identifying themselves as biracial or multiracial. And the amendment suggested was that it just add with 2 or more racial or ethnic groups. And again, it was in response to not necessarily picking one, but again, several people identify as just simply biracial or multiracial. And the suggestion was brought up. I certainly wasn't going to bring it up last night during the debate, but I appreciate Senator Hayes bringing it up now, and just thought maybe the committee should consider
Okay.
that as well.
Senator Reedy?
Very quickly, Madam Chair, as I know we're getting close to time to go to the floor. First of all, I just want to say I appreciate this conversation that we're having. And I know things got a little testy on the floor last night. I think folks saw the concerns that some of us had. And I appreciate that we're diving into this, because I do think it sounds like we're making some progress on some of these. Obviously, I still have some concerns overall, but I appreciate that we're talking about it, and I'm glad we're going to be able to come back and get some more clarity. Some of the things I was curious about have been answered, but I do think we need to, the aggregate point that Senator Jennings makes, I think, is very important. One other thing I thought is, simply as it relates to the reporting part of the bill, why wouldn't it be easier, better, and a little more clean cut to say you have to do this reporting if you're doing business with the state, obviously, or if you're a corporation that's a publicly filed corporation in the state of Maryland? And I thought that I remembered, but I do not remember for sure, and maybe Senator Botto can say, I thought that's what the bill from a couple years ago did, was publicly filed corporations. But it may have been, if it was more than that, I apologize, because I just didn't remember. But wouldn't it be a little simpler to say, it would get us out of this whole business of the concrete company. Of course, if they're doing business with the state, they'd have to file a report. But it would get us out of some of this, like, small business. So I know we're still waiting on the Attorney General's letter to say what the bill actually applies to. I just wanted to throw that out there, but I look forward to us, talking some more. So.
Okay, Senator Augustine.
Just briefly, I want to understand what right now we receive and how we receive the female board member information. I would like to know how we get it, and I'm on the SDAT right now, and I don't see where on SDAT by the companies but they do list the women.
You have to go to the annual report from the comptroller. And it's a one-pager. I can send that to you all. And it says that approximately 63,000 businesses submitted reports. Of the businesses submitting reports, 49,000 are listed address in Maryland. Among the headquartered in Maryland, the average representation of women in the boardroom is 33.8%. Slightly less than half of those headquartered in Maryland, 22 operate with a sole board member, and so the information is a one-pager. It's all aggregate. There's no specific information required. I guess you conceivably, if you required a similar reporting requirement from, this is the comptroller. They do this. It's information submitted to SDAT. I don't, but this is where the information is. I don't know if you can actually go get specific information on each company.
We've got to go some distance. What I will do is to give us an hour from when we get off the floor. So if you need food or something, and I'll state a definite time, and if we can come back here so we can get this worked out.